Hi guys. So I just did set matrix zeros. I had to look at the answer. I wasn't too sure about it. Wasn't too confident. It took me like 30, 40 minutes. I think I'll just re-record it here, such so that I can make sure that I did fully understand it and that I can present it better to the camera. As I think I was even saying anything back in the other video. I was just, yeah. But the question is, given an m by nx integer matrix, if an element is zero, set its entire row and column to zero. So the first thing I did last time was that if I saw a zero, I'm instantly going to set this whole row and this whole column to zero. But the problem was that if I'm at this point and I change this to zero, then what happens is I read the zero next, and then that sets this to zero and this sets to zero, which is quite bad. Reading that, I did think a BFS using a queue could have been a solution, but it could work. But that actually adds some unexpected space complexity, as we do need to store the zeros into some space. But the answer is an in place all of one constant time solution, and that's something I do want to share with you guys. So first things first, let's just get our row and column length. So m is going to be the length of our rows, and n is going to be the length of our columns. Cool. So how we're actually going to do this is we're going to set the first indices of each row and column as an indicator. So for example, if there's a zero here, we need to set this whole column to zero and this whole row to zero. So we're going to set this to zero and this set to zero. We're going to do that on the first pass, and such that on the second pass when we're coming back, we can see that, oh, this is zero. That means this whole row needs to be zero, and this is zero, so this whole column needs to be zero. One thing that we do need to import is that this right here. If we set this, the 0, 0th position to zero, how do we know if that means let's set this whole column to zero, or if that means that this row whole is zero? So that is one point of some ambiguity that might rose up. So how I'm going to set this out is I'm going to store a Boolean flag where if any zero occurs in this column, then that flag is true. And if it's true, whenever we are at the 0th position for the column, we will just send it to zero. So let's see, is first zero, and we first initialize it to false, and then let's get into our for loops. For row in range of m, yep, we're first going to check if matrix row is equal to zero. So this is we're going to check. We'll be checking the first position of all of these. Then we're going to do is first zero set to true. Now we're going to go into the next one for call in range. We're actually going to skip the first column if we remember it because we've basically done that here. We're actually going to skip the first column because there's no point. Well, if we do, and there does to be a zero, this will be set to zero, and again we run into that problem. So we'll be skipping the first column. If matrix row and column is equal to zero, then we're gonna set this to zero, and we're going to set the first column to zero as well. So that's it. For when we now that's for a first pass, so we've set everything to zero, and for the second pass, we're actually gonna be working backwards. This is because if we work forwards like we did again, we might change, like just as I said before, if we say this zero, we're going to set this whole thing to zero. Actually, a better example of this, if this is zero and if we went forwards, if we set this to zero, then that would mean that this gets set to zero, even though this not might actually be zero. And then what happens if we go to the next column, it'll read the zero and then try to make this row zero. Oh, wait, would it actually? Because this is only responsible for the rows though. Actually, let's see why it will not work. Let's try do it. Let's try do it forward. So it will work for that. How about for the actual submission? So let's see why it actually won't work for this case here. So the output is everything set to 0, which is not quite what we want, but let's see what's actually happening here. So the ideal output should be, so we do have a 0, it's going to be 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 4, 5, 2, 0, 3, 1, 0. But my answer is 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Now let's see why is that. Let's see, I'm going forward and I'm going in a forward direction, right? So let's see what it might look like after. Yeah, so it'll look like this. It'll actually be the same. So it'll look like this. So we see the 0 here. This is set to true. So we see the 0 there. So this means that this is for the whole row. Yeah, so this is set to 0. So this is going to be 0, which is fine. 0, 0. And then we're going to go here. Okay, there we go. And then we see that this column is 0. So that's set to 0, which is not what we want. Whereas if we worked backwards, it's going to see that 0, so set this to 0. There's no 0, set it to leave it 1. And this is 1 here, so leave it to 1. So it actually is quite important that we do it. Just one important thing to note is that for the columns, we don't want to look, we don't want to, yeah, we don't want to be looking at this first column as well, because we reserve this 0 to mean for its row rather than the column. And we'll just simply set that to 0 if the first 0 is set to 0. Whoops. So let's run this code. Oh, it's pending. Okay. Wait, let's see what's happening here. Set this to -1. Yeah. And if we actually run the submit, we'll see that it has been accepted. Cool.